So guys, I want to do a part two to my video where I talk about, black fatigue and ghetto moms. And I want to talk about my biological mother. And I also just want to dissect, behavior and other things that are kind of important to that situation really. So I was adopted into a white gay family. And the reason why I was adopted was because, I was born to a black Native American woman and also, a white father, really. And my mother had a bunch of litany of mental health issues. And I do want to talk about how it relates to black fatigue as I go on. That first of all, the story was that I was abused and neglected, and so was my older brother. And what happened was that my mom kept having kid after kid after kid. So there's a story that she had twins and she was abusive to them, got taken away, and then she's abusive to both of us. Like there's a story that we weren't potty trained. My older brother, what the happiest day of his life would always be like being going to the woods, playing with my aunts, and being taken care of by them, and always like when he ever went home, he would always be like really really sad really. And there's a story that my biological mother, Rose McKenna, she took a glass bottle, smashed it across my brother's face really, and that's how we got adopted. And there's a couple other things about my mom. Like there's some paperwork saying that she used to be a stripper. She used to do stripping in illegal houses, not like almost in illegal places, really, like places where that shouldn't be happening, or at parties. There's stories that she was in and out of jail a bunch of times, and that she was always violent and fighting people. And also like there's other things too about blaming her behavior on white people, or there's a story that she was sexually assaulted really. And I have no problem talking about her because she's such an abhorrent person. To hell with her. And I want to break down a couple of things. That first of all, I've learned in my life that it doesn't matter what you go through psychologically. If you are a horrible person, you're a horrible person. Because if not, then we're going to live in a world where we always make excuses for our behavior, or people are going to tell us to make excuses for the behavior of others. And with her behavior, just like beating to death almost her children, including me, or neglecting her children, there's no excuse for that. And part of it was because she did have a litany of mental health issues, like maybe a mix of bipolar, borderline, sociopath, violent tendencies, depression, anxiety, or, just past traumas and whatever, really. So that's also happens with a lot of black fatigue where one of it is not holding women accountable, seeing women as victims. And I have something else to say about that, which I'll say now, is that my adopted white parents, they always taught me only to forgive my mother for everything that she did, and I don't. And that's important because why should you forgive someone that nearly kills you? The reason why my brother has mental health issues and has not gone far in life is because of her. The reason why, I've had a bunch of anger, depression, and pent up rage for like a lot of years is because of her, really. Why should, and that happens a lot too, where a lot of times white people will tell their adopted black children to forgive the mama, and that's not appropriate, really. I always say, like, if I was a black girl and my father, and I had a black father who did the exact same things, we would treat differently because women are always looked at as victims. Or when it comes to black boys being abused by their black mothers, we always have to look at the black mama as misunderstood. Like there has to be something there. So part of it is not holding women accountable. And I even hate saying this. One thing that should happen is just like they do in the male prison, where if you are a chomo or a child abuser or an animal abuser in the male prisons, in the female prisons, we need to do that to women. If whatever she did was found out about and she was in jail, she should be dealt with in female prison, really, because there needs to be a code in all genders that if you are abusive to your children, we all got to stand on business with that. I know that's hard, but that's true, really. Why should it just be the men? Why should it just be the men? It has to be women. When women do wrong, they have to be held accountable. It's the same thing with all these teachers. Obviously, if a white woman has sex with a young boy, people think that that's hot, as they say in South Park. But if that was a black woman, or if that was a white man doing it to a child, really, that's when people get up in arms, really. So there's this apology culture in addition to just like blaming things on mental illness. The other thing that I will say about it is and then the other thing that I will say about it was that she just had a lot of violent tendencies, and as I said, that I think that one story I heard was the reason why we were adopted was because she took a glass bottle, smashed it across my brother's head. He was severely abused. She had a history of beating and abusing children. So there's a couple of things that I would say about this. That first of all, like I've said before, that stems from slavery days because, what happened to a lot of people and black people during the slavery days was that they were beaten by slave owners. They would see their children beaten in front of them. Or sometimes if there was like a house nigger and there was a bunch of like girls in that role really, if there was like a girl who misbehaved, there would be like maybe like that the woman house nigger and being told you got to beat that other slave. So part of, and then also too after slavery, one of the reasons why black people are abusive to their children, or they use a lot of like that belt whipping was because of slavery. Like the slave master used the whip. We whipped the belt really. That came from slavery, and that also passed down a way to handle children or whatever really. Like black people were not seen as human beings, so I think in a way, people there are a lot of people who don't see their children as human beings really. So part of one of the reasons why there's a lot of abuse in the black community or sexual abuse is because of what was passed down during slavery. But obviously, as I've said, it doesn't matter slavery or whatever. We always have to be good people. And I also will say that part of it is mental illness in the black community. That I think that, as I said, we all understand that really before the 2000s, really before like the later 2000s, having any type of mental health issue was seen as taboo, or you were retarded, or you were seen as a criminally insane. Really, there was always like that insecurity when people had mental health issues. So that was one of the reasons why I think that a lot of people struggled with mental health issues in the black community, really, because there was always like a sense of, well, if you talk to anybody, you're weak or you're crazy or it's a sign of weakness, really. But the important thing is that, like I've said, really, if you are a horrible person, you're doing horrible things to others, really, you know, um, you have to be held accountable, and then mental health has to be normal. Like I really think that, like you see Tony Soprano, but I've never watched one television show or heard of one famous television show where a black person is going to therapy, or maybe a black person is going to therapy over anger issues. Like that's not really normalized, because that was one of the reasons why my mom had issues, was because part of also that was black mental health issues was never really what was never really like normalized. And I've gone to therapy before, and I've dealt with racism by different therapists, and that could be a subject matter for another video. But that's also kind of one of the issues that we see in the black fatigue, is this in the system of, well, if someone's having kid after kid, or they're abusive, or they have bad attitudes, or they have anger issues, that's somebody who needs therapy, and that's not really supported in the black community. The other thing that about it is, almost like what me and my brother dealt with. We've had anger, we've had flip outs, or sometimes, my brother would be yelling about, oh, well, he would love to do this thing, that thing to my biological mother. And I remember, like, in high school, we had this thing called the Great Program, where we shared personal stories about our lives, like struggles. And I talked about my biological mother. I remember having a mental breakdown. And I was saying, like, I hope she burns in hell. That there was a story that she was sexually assaulted as a teenager. I wouldn't care if people did that to her over and over, because of how horrible a person she was. Like eye for an eye, really. And I also said things like, one of the reasons why I hate having black skin or black heritage was because of her, and just what a horrible, evil bitch she was. Because I was also taught, and this was like me in high school, and I was like, like probably 16 years old, because I was taught, because my white father at when I was like 11 told me the story of my biological mother, and they're like, oh, well, adults have problems too, you need to forgive and move on, after all the horrible things she did, nearly beaten to death, four more children, really neglecting me, neglecting my brother, being in the glass bottle, giving him mental health issues for life, giving me like relationship issues for my entire life, really. Oh, well, you're forgiven, really. And that's one of the reasons why I had that breakdown. But that's also true with what I said in the black community with ghetto moms and everything like that. is that we're always kind of taught that when women are like this, we got to be understanding. Like I told you about the House of Pain, you know, the woman in that Malik's mom, you know, she had drug issues. She has, if I'm using the term correctly, she has relapse issues or withdrawal issues, and she's violent and erratic. She burnt down a house. She goes to a school, and everybody's calling Malik the son of a crack addict and embarrassing him. You know, and Malik's told to be forgiving and understanding, but the problem is, and they're also trying to get the family back together. Really, there has to that teaches forgiveness, but it also teaches that when a black woman acts ghetto and violent and destroys the family, you know, strike one, strike two, strike three. If that was CJ, the father, and he did all that stuff, really, he'll be gone the first thing. They'll be taking his paycheck. They'll be putting him in jail, really. So we're always kind of taught that when black women do horrible things, they get multiple chances. But part of that is also because of this culture of gender roles. You know, women are seen as victims. Women are seen as you need understanding, forgiveness, really. And there's also female privilege. You know, like in the white community, I've said this many times about how if white women act sociopathic or do a bunch of bad things, you know, there's overlooking, really. But in the black community, that extends to whenever a black mama is abusive, really. Or in the Asian culture, as I've said many times, you know, you look at Japan, and there's a lot of women nowadays. They said like high school girls. There's an issue with high school girls prostituting themselves, and what that means is that you can pay a high school girl to sit on your lap for like an hour, or hold a girl in your arms, or hug a girl, or cuddle with a girl, and they're underage, really, because in Japanese culture, objectifying women was very popular, really, and then also like trying to act cute or trying to like manipulate men, really, just by acting cute or whatever. Like there's in Asian cultures, you know, that's normal. But also in Asian cultures, there's being harsh and beating their kids and high expectations, really. You know, so every race, every culture, there's issues with how women behave with bad behavior and abusive behavior. But that's also true from the men's side. You know, in black culture, if we know this, that men beating their kids, or men whipping their kids with belts, or men not being there, or men being violent and machismo, that's an issue in black culture. And white culture, it's men getting away with racism, men not disciplining their kids, or men using domestic violence or destroying the kids' property in white culture. Like Tony Soprano was really a role model for my parents and other people's parents. And then also in Asian cultures too, there's misogyny, or if a woman is being abusive to the kids, to discipline the kids, there's always a thing about Asian men just saying, okay, that's got to happen, really, you know. So like every culture, there's definitely like issues and all that, really, you know. There's definitely like issues with everything. So it doesn't stem to black women, really, but definitely, you know, what we do to our children, how we treat children, has an impact on the rest of their life, really. Like I've said before, that part of me would say I would never want to have kids with black women, you know, because of that. I don't want to have kids in general, but if I was forced to have a child, I would date an Asian woman because, you know, I'm more attracted to Asian women than anything else, really. And the second would be a white woman or a Latino woman. Like, part of what happened to me is like, you know, I would never ever want to have a child with a black woman. And there's many black boys or black men or mixed race people like myself who would say because I had a bad experience with a black mother, I would never want to have a child with that. Or like I've told you guys about hospitals, where many times when a black baby is born from a black mother, if the black mother has a history of violence or bad tendencies, they'll remove the child quickly. If it's a white woman, maybe we'll roll the dice with that one. But there's cause and effect for that behavior. And then also too, you know, like I've been harassed by like, you know, homeless people, you know, of all races, really. But it always seems like, you know, when people who are homeless are black women, there's a lot of people who are rude or combat them or are angry with them, and that stems from, you know, ghetto moms and all this really ghetto stuff that goes on, really. You know, there's always a depiction of, and that's one of the reasons why there's police brutality on black women a lot more, or roughing them up, or people just saying horrible things. Like I know I remember one person in high school who was black, said like the most beautiful black woman is Dennis Rodman in a wedding dress. Like there's always been like a look at black women as ugly, violent, unwanted, and I think the best word's unwanted. And part of it stems from this behavior. So this behavior has to end. Like black fatigue just furthers black trauma. I mean, black fatigue with violent black mamas or black mothers. It fuels like a psychogenerational trauma, and part of that would be gentrification in a way where people will be like, okay, well, I want to have my babies with other races instead of the black woman because of all these things that go on really. But like I've said before, and I'll say it again, and this is very important to reiterate: not all black women are like that. And it's also bad that we have Instagram and other things where sometimes we put the shine on black women who behave like that. Like I have neighbors, and there is a girl with autism, and she has like two parents, and they do everything for her, and they're all black really, and the mom's patient and respectful, and all that really great stuff really. Like why isn't the news talking about that really? I think it was Oprah Winfrey who was sexually abused, and she became a really good mom. There's the wrestler Titus O'Neil. Like his mother was raped at a young age, and she raised him and did right by him. Why aren't we talking about her? Why are we not talking about Michelle Obama a lot more? That's also kind of the other thing too, is that I think the way to fight the black fatigue is also showing like black women who are doing it right, really. So, so all that stuff is really really important, really. So ultimately, it's really unfortunate that we lived in an era or a time period where getting mental health issues was seen as like taboo and whatever, really. So I apologize. There's just an asshole, just in the parking lot behind me. But yeah, one reason why I don't celebrate my birthday or celebrate my birthday alone, one of the reasons why, I think after I was told about the story about my biological mother, I stopped dating women. And I remember like when I was like 6 or 7 years old, really, I used to be really misogynistic, or I used to be really inappropriate. And I remember like, part of it was because I had anger towards my mother when I was like 6 or 7 or 8 years old, really. And then also too, it's a complicated thing. It really impacts your psyche, really. It's like what they said about like Tony Soprano. Like he grew up with a very emotionally abusive mom, so you see how he cheats on his wife. He curses at his daughter. He also just doesn't have a good relationship with her. He's upfront about his racism. He hangs out with strippers and other women and stuff like that. Like honestly, how parents treat their children has a huge impact. Like I work in a psych ward. There's plenty of men who abuse and sexually abuse their daughters. Gender's reverse. There's men who do horrible things to their daughters, and their daughters grow up to be porn stars, or they grow up to be with around abusive men, or I've met like girls in the psych ward who are 8 or 9 years old who talk to counselors about saying they want to be porn stars and strippers because of what happened to them as kids, really. So people have to understand like the impact that you have as a parent when you just do horrible things to your children. Let's all be better, really, and let's all realize that some people are not meant to have children, and then there's some people who are meant to have therapy instead of children.